This is Scott Richmond
and Arnie Sherman.
You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 1015 FM. Arnie Sherman, good morning to you.
Scott Richmond, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing well. What do you know?
Did you have a good week this week? That's what I want to know about. You had a good week?
I had a very good week. Thank you for asking.
You know, we have a very interesting show for our local listeners here.
Tell me.
James Grunke, who's head of Missoula Economic Partnership, they'll be joining us in a few minutes to talk about economic development in Missoula. And that topic in this community, as well in almost any community in the country, is a controversial one.
Right.
You know, it's talking about moving in some direction in the future while preserving your present and your past. It's about nostalgia and real-time realities. It's about, in some cases, the good old days that never were. I mean, we have some of that even happening in our presidential elections, right? Make America great again is a slogan of one of our candidates, one of our well-known candidates, as you know. And that's sort of a boastful admission, right? It implies, to some extent, that American exceptionalism and the indispensable American and the great American doesn't exist anymore. And it's an admission of a negative view of the present, you know, and a glorified view of the past. And that sort of thing happens anytime you're talking about economic development. We just had this arise in the discussion over the Missoula Mercantile. We've even, we had a whole show about that. You know, is something from the past always, should always be preserved?
Yes.
Is the future always going to be better than the past? People change, and I recently visited with some relatives I hadn't seen for years, and they change, but they didn't change very much. I went back to an old neighborhood I lived in. I hadn't seen for years, and there were some things about it that were identical to the way they were when I was a kid, and there were some things that were completely new.
Yes.
So I guess the whole issue of, do we really need, or how vigorous should economic development be in a community is a bone of contention among many people.
Sure.
And I'm not sure, what the right answer is, and that's part of the reason we have, James Grunke on the show to talk about it. There are some things about, for example, living here in Missoula, we like it because it does harken back in some ways to an earlier era. People are more interactive, more friendly, more engaged. You kind of know your surroundings much better than living, in my old stomping grounds of Long Island.
What would Missoula's tagline be?
There's 8 million people living on Long Island.
Well,
now.
I know. 8 million?
8 million people.
That's big.
Between
Brooklyn, Queens,
Nassau, and Suffolk County. I mean, that's a lot of people on a little island.
So what is James Grunke's tagline for Missoula? Is it
we're going to ask him what
making Missoula even better?
It's a great community. It's a place you want to be. Montana's always been the last best place. I've never liked that slogan for Montana.
What does it mean, last best?
I think it implies that we're the only place where it's the way it's always been, and it's pristine, and you got big sky, and again, that's a point of contention, being the last best place. Dirty little secret. There are a lot of other nice.
When did they put Route 90 in here?
Well,
that ended that conversation.
I've been around 20 years, and Missoula looks a lot different than 20 years ago. And there's some people here who say, God, I want it to be the way it used to be. And then I talk to people who were here 30 years ago, and there were a lot of boarded up stores downtown. And, there was feast or famine, depending on how the timber mills were going and how mining was going.
I was going to say one person's feast is another person's famine. And sometimes, unfortunately,
there's no question about that. I always thought the best slogan for Montana, to me, was a more progressive, forward-thinking slogan, which I came up a few years ago and people liked, but it never really caught on. Which was,
what was that?
Montana, big enough to hold the future.
Ooh, I like that.
I thought that was more progressive sounding than saying, this is the last place to get to. I mean, we're.
Why didn't that take off? Montana big enough to hold the future?
Because I think there's this belief in the good old days and maintaining what was, maintaining Montana just the way it was for, your grandparents
tenants hate,
or your grandchildren.
I've learned in being here the last 3 years, people don't like change here very much. They are resistant to certain amounts of change. But if it's spoon-fed to them and if it's meted out in a way where you can see the progress in front of you, they kind of understand it.
Well, they don't like, people coming in from California by and large.
Right.
They don't want things. They've come here so that change would be, as you said, paced and measured.
Right.
So James has his work cut out for him because he's supported by the city and the business community, and they want new jobs and new economic stimulation in the area.
Right.
And they want change. I mean, economic development is change.
You are listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO. Our guest today is going to be James Grunke, who is the head of the Missoula Economic Partnership.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
And he's going to be I've spoken to James before. He's a fascinating person and guest, and we'll be right back after these words. All right, we are back with What Do You Know? We have James Grunke with us.
For our listeners, James Grunke is the head of Missoula Economic Partnership. He's been coming to Missoula since 2010, originally as a consultant, and now for the last, how long? 4 years?
Since May of 2012.
As executive director of the Missoula Economic Partnership. Before that, he was director of the Boise Valley Economic Partnership and has a long history of doing economic development. So let me just start out right, from the very beginning and saying there are people who are against economic development. They don't want to see things change. I mean, they want all of the benefits of economic development, right? They want good-paying jobs, and they want good employers in the community, and they want good stewardship of everything, but they don't like change very much. So how do you push an agenda that's future-focused and that leads to change in a community?
I'm glad that you start with such an easy question, too, right?
And it goes downhill from there. I'll ask you about where you get your shoes.
That's exactly right. Economic development is very difficult, and it's really difficult for people to understand because it means so many different things to different people. And a lot of times that you're against, it's not that you're against growth, but you like how things are, right? I've chosen to come to this community because I like how it is. And if you're bringing in new industry, you're changing the dynamic. And that's hard for people at times.
Well, in some ways, it's a little bit more than that. For example, Missoula Mercantile, they don't like an empty building there, but every possible proposal for what to do with the building that was going to change it from being 8 buildings and just a hodgepodge, there was a pretty vocal group against that.
And again, because change is difficult, right? So I think that's a great point. And since I came to Missoula in March of 2010, that building's always been empty. I have never seen it occupied, and I think I'm as guilty as other. You get used to seeing it, but you no longer see it anymore, right? You drive by it. It's been so long you don't even notice it anymore. But you have to have a fresh set of eyes looking at it and saying, oh, my God, why is the most important corner in your community empty?
Well, let me just tell you, what you missed was when it was Macy's, there was a creaky staircase going upstairs in an elevator that people were afraid to get into. The floors were uneven. The ceiling was peeling in lots of places. And people, they closed the Macy's down because they didn't have a lot of, it didn't attract very many customers.
Right, and you see even just this week or last week, Macy's announcing another 100 stores closing, right? The days of the department store are challenged. But let me just back up to one moment to the very first question. How do you deal with people who don't like change or don't like even some of the industry that we're trying to attract? And we take a pretty simple philosophy on that. It's not our job to pick the winners and losers who gets to do business here. Mm-hmm. We think our job is to present why Missoula is a great place for you to invest and put your company into. And if it's something the community doesn't want, it'll quickly become apparent. But we're not the ones to decide who gets to do business. Our view is everybody gets to do business, so we'll help anybody.
Right.
So let's play back the process of the Mercantile over the last couple of months. Do we feel like that landed where it was supposed to land?
I think so, and I think we have to be really fair to the historical preservation group.
Sure.
So, because I'm involved in economic development, I met the proposed ownership months and months before it ever became public.
Right.
Which would be very, very typical. We've seen the plans. We've discussed it. The very first time this is ever presented to that group is they come in and say, glad to meet you, give me a permit to tear it down. Right. So you can understand why they're a little taken aback. Right. And their job is historical preservation.
Right.
So they didn't have the benefit of myself or Ellen Buchanan at the MRA or the mayor that we have worked and interacted with as ownership group for months. And so I can certainly understand what their position on this, and their job is preserving. At the end of the day, you have to look at, can you cash flow this project? And it's impossible to do it. And that's why in the 4+ years I've been the CEO of the Missoula Economic Partnership, I have probably talked to 20 different groups that have taken a look at the mercantile. How do we put it back into production? Everybody's starting point always is, how do we preserve the shell? And the outcome is always, we can't do it.
You can't do it.
You just cannot.
Well, because for myriad of reasons, tenants want a certain kind of environment that if they're going to be paying rent on the building, and occupancy standards and requirements mean you have to have a safe building, and the building materials in that building are very old. I mean, there were many reasons why everyone, including Whole Foods, took a look at it and took a pass.
Right, and some of the most sophisticated developers in the country have been here looking at that.
They couldn't build. And if Whole Foods took a block on Houston Street in New York that had been around for a couple hundred years and figured out how to make that work, if they couldn't make this work, it couldn't be made to work.
And I want to emphasize, I have never met any developer who's looked at that property that their starting point was tear it down. It's always been, wow, this is a community icon. How do we make it work?
Right.
So what do you say? I know what your mission and mandate is, but I had a conversation just the other day with someone who said, sure, we have some new jobs here, but it's a call center. One of those $40 or $50, timber jobs and mill jobs, when are those coming back to Missoula? Well, I know what my answer would be. Probably never. But how do you deal with, we do have an issue here of rising home costs and stagnant wages. So what do we do about that?
Well, again, thanks for the easy softball questions to get this going. You're right. So the manufacturing base, it's easy to forget that Missoula historically has been a blue-collar town. That's really the legacy of this community.
Even though it has a major university, it's still a blue-collar town.
We've had, and we look around, and it's still vitally important. We spend a lot of time looking at the manufacturing base and how to diversify and how to grow it. Our manufacturing job base is about 10% of all the jobs in Missoula County are manufacturing. We think a healthier number is around 12 to 14%. Even at that 10%, we're the second highest in the state of Montana.
Right?
Yeah.
What are the other key sectors
that we look at?
Yeah.
Well, clearly the healthcare is leading.
Education,
financial services, a big service.
Right,
we have a huge professional back office operation. So sometimes people would say that's a call center, but it's not.
Right.
So you take Allegiance, their major core here, Consumer Direct.
Was it cost care?
Yeah, they were.
Right.
And so they're consolidating. So professional back office is also a really important industry. So these are high-paying, clean, low-impact jobs. The other thing that Missoulians, and I think we're all guilty of this because we live here, is we don't recognize the strength of the technology industry here.
Right.
So everybody says, wow, technology companies are all happening in another community in the state. The truth is the most technology companies in the state of Montana are located in Missoula, Montana.
Is that right?
But what
they're doing,
the
perception is happening somewhere because they're happening in nondescript office parks, and their customers are not Missoula-based, right? And so unless you know, you don't even know. I like to give the example of, we all know where the former Goodwill was on the corner of South and Brooks, right? But nobody knows that today there's 100 high-paying jobs inside of that working for Allegiance benefit plan. It all happened at Transform. Now there's 100 people working there. None of us know that. I mean, I know it, but the community doesn't. We don't even acknowledge that, and that's part of it.
Let's switch to another success story. So you come here 4 years ago, and Stimson Lumber is an empty lumber mill on the sort of what people would describe as the edge of Missoula. The town of Bonner is like a ghost town, right? And people are lamenting all those great jobs. Now 4 years later, what's happened to Stimson Lumber?
Well, that is, I think, a tremendous success story that we should all be very proud of seeing in our community. It all started with the ownership. Steve Nelson and Mike Boehm, two local owners that had a leap of faith.
University of Montana graduates.
They, I remember, I actually was just telling this story. We stood out there in December of 2011. My feet are still cold from standing in that snow. And they announced, here's our vision for this. And remember, there was nothing.
Big empty lumber facility.
No, I know.
Northwest Paints still had a small operation, but there's a handful of people working there. Today, there's over 15 companies that are located there. There's over 300 people working on that site. One of them is going to be probably the largest data cloud computing center in the United States is going to be in Bonner.
Really?
They currently have 5,000 servers whirring around out there, and they're on their way to 30,000 servers.
Those are good-paying jobs.
Those are good-paying jobs. They are a differentiator for our community. There's no other. Not only is this the largest data center in Missoula or in Montana, North America is their goal, and it's because available land, educated workforce, and low energy costs. That's why they're here. And it's really pretty amazing to go in and see.
What building are they in?
So they are in the old plywood building, which is the one largest along Highway 200.
Okay.
So that's 7 acres under one roof of racks and racks and racks and racks of servers.
You're kidding. And wait, quick question though. How did they figure out how to do all the ventilation and the cooling? Because that's a major undertaking.
So
did they not want to raise that and just rebuild on that space?
Because the acquisition cost, just to build a space, you can't do it. I mean, there's not like 7-acre buildings laying around in the United States that you could do it, that you have cheap energy costs. And so they could almost afford not to come here.
Wow.
And if you go in there, it's incredibly hot because it's all the electricity being used, and it's incredibly loud, and it's all the fans venting all the heat and the energy out.
So the employees there, all local, do they attract new people to the community?
Most of them are local. They've brought the management team externally. Some of them, the person who's running it, thought, I'd be here for 2 months, and now he's planning to make Missoula his home. A typical story.
So it's always the chicken or the egg. Do we need more housing in this community to accommodate future growth, or is the growth driving new housing? Because there was just an article out this past week that property under $350,000 is very hard to find in Missoula, and it gets snapped up very quickly. And as you know, the old sawmill district is developing, and the first buildings of condos are now open. The first building's open, and people are moving in. And we have the Fox Theater project and a number of other projects. Are those anticipating growth or responding to what's already taking place here?
Well, we have to do both. We have to look at it both directions. And this would be my example of how I can make any short answer long, because it's a complicated question. Over the next year, we're going to do 2 major initiatives under Missoula Economic Partnership. One is we're going to do our first workforce benchmarking report. We need to know the state of the workforce, right? I hear workforce is a problem from every quarter, but I don't know what that means.
Right.
People say I can't.
Does it mean we don't have enough, or
right.
or in the wrong area?
Exactly. So we have to do this report, but immediately, or on a parallel path, you have to be doing, what are we doing for workforce housing? And I just was having a conversation about this. It's almost crazy to me today to think in our minds now affordable housing is sub $250,000 housing. Right. But that's what it is.
Like Missoula,
I know.
Montana.
Amazing.
But the reality is, for you to build a house in Missoula or Missoula County that's going to meet that price range, let's say $200,000 to $250,000, you have to look at a lot after it's got all the improvements on it, that's all the infrastructure, that it's costing the developer about $30,000. And the ability to find $30,000 lots inside of Missoula city limits to build that housing just doesn't exist. So, of course, we're going to have a struggle that's going to be competing between sprawl and infill.
Right.
And the solution is really, it's going to be both. And
it is kind of expensive. I was watching on TV, I'm addicted lately to the House and Garden Network, and they have all those shows, Flip and Flop, and Love It or Listed. But Flip or Flop is in Waco, Texas, which is a college town. There's Baylor University there, and the average house in an average neighborhood there is selling at $50 to $100 a square foot. We're like 2 or 3 times that here.
Part of it, though, is also just lack of inventory. So since the recession, there's just not housing that's been built. And so there is so much demand. We should be seeing a house, typically they should be on the market between 2 and 6 months.
Right.
Well, they're in bidding wars the day it goes up. Yeah. People are selling above what they're asking for. If you're a seller, this couldn't be a better market.
Right. Well,
if you're a buyer.
But that's in the lower ones. The above 350, it's still
slow.
A buyer's
Let me do a
market.
quick ID. You're listening to What Do You Know on KGVO. Our guest is James Grunke, the CEO of the Missoula Economic Partnership.
So,
go, Arnie.
So, I'm on a roll here. I'm going to keep going. So this week, the City Council approved their $100,000 contribution to the Missoula Economic Partnership. There was some discussion earlier of not giving you $100,000, of giving you $25,000, and there were some folks complaining about communication. What's your answer to that? Are you effectively communicating with your stakeholders, do you think? Or do you think that's a legitimate a criticism or concern that was voiced?
I think any criticism is legitimate because perception is reality. And if I spent 100% of my time doing nothing but outreach and communication,
right,
I still would not be doing enough. And I think what MEP tries to pride itself on is when we hear criticism or we hear things that we can do better, we take it extremely serious and we try to respond immediately. And I feel, and I can't speak for the city council, I can speak for the feeling I got in talking with them, is it not even necessarily that they didn't feel like they're being communicated with, like, hey, what are you up to? They don't feel like they're engaged with us, right? They want to know, how can we be a part of your economic development activities? Who are the companies you're working with? What can we do? Are there policies we should be doing? And in that light, absolutely, I don't think that they've been engaged. We may have taken a little overly simplistic version of it. We say, the mayor's on our board, the mayor's on your board, we think you're engaged. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean
doesn't
to them.
respond to everybody's...
And so I would say we have taken steps to say, you are right, let's correct it. Because while we're a private sector-led economic development organization, most of our funding, almost 80% of it comes from the private sector in this community.
Right.
It's important to have the public sector involved.
Sure, because economic development is a public-private partnership.
It is. Somebody has to put in the roads, somebody has to put in the sewer, somebody has to make the policy, somebody has to zone the land, all of those things. And so they have an important function and role to play with us. And if you're feeling that not engaged, then it's our job to get them engaged.
Right. So before working in Boise at the Boise Valley Economic Partnership, you were a consultant with National Community Development Services, and so you did consulting work in Savannah and in Tacoma and other places around the country. How does Montana compare to these other places that you were putting economic development plans together for?
Well, and correction, that was after I left the Boise Valley.
Right, okay,
is when I was doing the consulting work. Well, Missoula and Montana, it sounds trite or overly simplistic, but in my mind, Missoula and Montana is unexpected excellence. I mean, if you have not been here and you get here and you say, oh my gosh, the talent, the smart people, the lifestyle, it's just this unknown gem. And I would have to say, even though I grew up in a bordering state, if I had ever been asked, of the 50 states, what are you going to live in? Montana would have been pretty far down on the list, and that was just because of my own ignorance, and that's really the rest of the country. It's such an amazing place, and what we have, I'm an absolute fan of all things Montana and Missoula.
Sure.
Arnie's got a great tagline, by the way.
Yeah.
Tell James.
Yeah, well, we were talking about it earlier. At one point when I was with the World Trade Center, I didn't particularly like the tagline, the last best place. I thought that was not as progressive as it ought to be for the things that we're doing here. And I had a tagline which was Montana big enough to hold the future, which I thought was more progressive.
I like that too.
I like that.
But you're also dealing with a mentality that is a fairly strong mentality that we don't want everybody to know about everything here. There are people that rather have go away signs or stay in Colorado, stay in California. We've recently gone over 1 million people, and I think, and probably you think that's really good. We're attracting new people to Montana. There are people who don't like it.
Yeah,
and people that want it to be small and distant from the rest of the problems of the rest of the world.
But we have to attract more. I was at a meeting.
Why do we have to attract more?
I was at a meeting on Monday of this week with the governor, and we were talking about how are we getting new people into the state? What are we doing for recruitment?
Right.
And the statistic is if every single graduate of the Montana University system chose to stay in Montana today,
which is about 30, 40,000.
About 40,000, and I will point 80% of all state of Montana graduates stay in Montana.
Right. But
if we all kept all of them, we still couldn't meet the demand for the jobs of home. So we have to have in-migration to meet the job demands of today, let alone the future.
Sure.
And our future in our community is always going to be tied to the University of Montana and those people who come here, right? Their future and our future will be always together. Whether they work or live in Missoula after they graduate from the University of Montana, they will always have an affinity and a connection to Missoula, right? And so
is this part of the reason that we're building a new Missoula College here in town?
Well, that again is just demand, and that was actually another really interesting. Over 50% of the students that attend Missoula College are not from Missoula County. So this is really a statewide function that's being served, but it brings people to our community, and it says, hey, I love Missoula. How do I work and stay here? We're open for business.
How does MEP help consult, work with the university to help get their enrollment up?
Well,
that's got to be a big initiative for the whole.
On the other hand, just I'll be the curmudgeon. Up enrollment isn't always the best thing if you have the right kind of enrollment.
But people are losing their jobs at the university because enrollment's down.
Right, but targeted enrollment of the right kind of enrollment, forgetting the faculty, brings the right kind of talent to the state that matches with the needs in the business industry.
Right, but I will be a shill for my monthly column I write.
I know.
And I wrote one a few months ago about student enrollment is not purely a University of Montana responsibility. It's all of our responsibility.
It's a community responsibility.
What are we doing to say to our loved ones, our nieces and nephews and grandchildren, or saying, come to the University of Montana? I went to the University of Idaho, and I was talking to one of my friends I went to college with, and his daughter was looking at places to go to school, and he was talking about she wanted to do some ecology, and I said, we've got some of the best programs in the nation here at the University of Montana. She's entering here this fall. I mean, some of it's just simple.
Sure.
Come to the University of Montana.
I'm not criticizing that. All I'm saying is that the only you cannot use a growing enrollment as the only gauge of whether a university is prosperous and is meeting the needs of the business community or the community in general.
That's right. And we think we try very much to do a lot of interaction with the University of Montana. We've spent a lot of time in different departments to make sure that their programs are lining up with the needs. We're really fortunate that President Engstrom serves on the board of directors for us.
Right.
And so for us to have a direct conduit to the highest levels of the administration is nothing but beneficial.
Right. I know. Yes, but there is a lot of discussion about the growth. I mean, I know, for example, people that go to universities that have grown from 15 to 50,000 students, and they hate going there.
Absolutely,
it's too big.
They never get to meet a professor. They never get to have.
They're taught by graduate students.
Right. And the other thing is sometimes university, in order to get the state subsidy, respond to current trends in industry that may be short-lived, like the Bakken oil boom, and you build a whole program and then you can't sustain it, and then you're scuffling to sustain it. So I just want to make the point, and I would reiterate that point, and I do to people who look at it, that the only gauge of a university should be the quality of the education it provides, not if they're adding students every year and making it bigger.
No, and I will agree. And again, as I pointed out, I went to the University of Idaho. When I was there, University of Idaho had a college of mines. It doesn't exist anymore, right? So you have to adapt.
Now you have the College of Potatoes.
But now look at this big server farm that's going to be expanding in Bonner. That's going to impact and influence curriculum and attractive learning. I mean, I already know that they have a program there, but it could be much larger to accommodate. Right?
Much more robust.
Right, as an on-ramp to that.
So for our listeners, what are the things that are coming, the coming attractions? What are the things that are coming here that are exciting?
Tell us some, what do you know?
We need to know these things. I know there are some things that are confidential, and even in your conversation with the city council, some of the things that they want to know about, you can't divulge because you have non-disclosure agreements.
That's right.
But in the area where you don't have that, what are the things that are coming here that we can look forward to?
Well, many. This is an exciting time to be in Missoula and Missoula County. It's one of the things that I think people fail to recognize is we have more people working today in Missoula County than in the history of Missoula County. So all the job losses that occurred at the turn of this decade have all been made up and far exceeded. We've had robust job growth. we're going to continue to see massive amount of capital investment into commercial projects here. I could easily think of $500 million, again, $500 million of new investment into our community over the next 3 or 4 years. Some of them the projects that we talked about, one of the ones that you talked about, Old Sawmill District, we're going to continue to see tens of millions of dollars poured into that site.
700 residential units there alone.
We're going to see. So this is an exciting time to be in Missoula County. We're going to see continued expansion in industry that is particularly tied to pharmaceuticals and life sciences. Missoula is uniquely positioned in the country for kind of bioscience and biochemistry jobs. A few years ago, we partnered on what was called the Missoula Vaccine Partnership. And it was one of the times the federal government was looking for national security. We need to diversify where vaccine production is made in the United States. And so we did this study, and it found out that Missoula, Montana is one of 2 unique places in the country that makes sense for vaccine production. And so because of the university, because of the laboratory south of here, because of GSK and Hamilton, all these things that it's a unique storm. I think we're going to continue to see pretty robust growth in the healthcare industry. But it's not just, we're adding jobs to the hospital. We're adding jobs to all kinds of little unique niche industries. We have a company that's doing some data mining of healthcare records for better diagnostic work. Those are all things that are really happening here in Missoula. And again, because we're here, it's easy for us to lose sight of all the amazing steps forward that we're making.
How do you get the word out? I mean, that's the question, right? It's these interviews, right? It's these forums, but how do you really create more of a community event or something like that?
That's actually one of the things that the president of the university and I have spoken a little bit about is how do we celebrate some of the amazing research that's happening that is leading the world. So I know you know about sunburst sensors, right? So they beat the entire world on a competition for sensing particles in water. I'm oversimplifying. Right. So that's here. Right, so they competed not only as the best technology, but as the most cost-effective. They won $1 million. They won it from it was the wife of Eric Schmidt from Google founder who funded this, and that is one of many, many, many stories in this community, and that's the difficulty. That's really the answer to your question. When people talk to me, I want to know the companies you're working with, and well, I can't tell you. Or I can say, well, this company's hired 300 new people. That doesn't mean anything. What means is the connection of a story. And that's what we have to get better at. It's a storytelling.
So, James, if you had a magic wand and could wave it, what are the things that we should have here? Not only business-wise, but, in terms of culture and entertainment. And all. What are the things we should have here that we don't? Like
for a city of our size, I mean, the cultural amenities that we have here are really unmatched in the state of Montana.
Well, the university obviously has a lot to do with that, right?
Our biggest limitation for growth right now is just people. We need trained bodies. People. We need people coming to live and work here. We need to do a better job when somebody's in a hotel in Missoula, Montana, that they read a little flyer that says, "Do you like it here? Would you like to learn how to live and work and stay here? Call MEP." And I mean, some things are really simple, but you just have to just do it as well.
I also think that the different groups that speak to the community, whether it be the Chamber of Commerce, the MDA, the Destination Missoula, the MEP, they all need to kind of meet in a common place and talk about the benefits of what Missoula has to offer both its citizens, the people that live here, but people that come here, to your point, and why this is a good place to relocate, because that's where growth comes from.
But as we already talked about, there are people that bristle at the thought of this scenario, right?
But you're painting a complete picture for them. You're not just saying this is all about new buildings and new jobs
and new congestion,
right?
On the highways and the roads.
If
and the lights.
Like you said, but James said it at the outset. He's like, "Hey, the Historical Preservation Society really was kind of caught off guard on this last one, and they didn't have the full briefing, right?" Engage them in the process a little more so that it's no longer a surprise, but they're part of the story. And they're telling the story for you.
So you're the public-private collaboration here in Missoula to do economic development, and you have between 4 or 5 people on the staff. that's not enough to do what needs to get done. How do you do what you're doing? And how do you limit what you're doing? Because there's just so many bodies. We've talked before about Savannah, Georgia, where I do some work. It's only twice the size of Missoula, but they have 15 or 17 full-time staff and a budget that's 8 times what your budget is to work in an area that's twice the size. So how do you get done what you're doing?
Well, part of our responsibility sometimes is saying no. Like, we don't do this. And so we define it as we do economic development. We don't do community development. And that's a difference.
Right.
So, parks and trails, parks and trails and quality of life, all of those things are important.
Right.
Those aren't us, right? We're pure economic development. So I always preach, we do 3 things. Business attraction, help an existing business that wants to grow, expand, business startup. And if you're outside those 3 things, we're not the one for you. Now, we'll certainly take a call and help direct people where they want to go because they call us because they don't know where to go. But we're not the small business development center. We don't do business plans. There's other assets to do. So we also don't duplicate services.
So is there some balance between the attraction and then helping existing businesses have the tools and resources to grow and expand?
Yeah, and this is a great question in economic development. So we as an organization, we'd like to see about 60% of our growth in jobs coming from existing businesses. And we'd like to see the balance either be a startup or companies that are attracted to the area. And it's really funny. If you ask most people, okay, help me prioritize. Should we help existing businesses grow and expand? Should we spend all our time trying to get companies here or startups? Most people say, I think you should spend a lot of time doing your existing businesses.
Helping the local guys that are already here.
However, everybody likes seeing a ribbon cut, right?
Right.
So we do want to see.
Well, you can also cut a ribbon on an existing company that builds and expands.
But we talked about one earlier, that has 100 new jobs that most of Missoula drives by every day and doesn't know about.
Who are some of the big private groups in Missoula that are helping with MEP that are like big members?
So you would think. So we have about 150, and we call them investors. And so you're investing into our community. And our largest would be the usual suspects. So Community Hospital, Providence Hospital, the banks, First Interstate, First Security Bank, Missoula Federal Credit Union, the large builders, Jackson Contracting Group, et cetera. So that's
the University
of Montana, city, county, of course. But economic development can't just be done by the big players.
Right.
We need the very small player. We need, James's radiator shop is just as important, having a say in what our economic future looks like as Providence. And we're all about high-paying, high-growth jobs. That's what we try to do.
So one of the issues that we deal with is air service. Mm-hmm. We actually have, and I think you'd agree, excellent air service. We have nonstops to 13 cities here, and it's better than most other places. I know, if you're out on Long Island, even though there's 3 million people, you got to drive an awful long way to get to LaGuardia.
Go to Islip.
You're right. But it doesn't have much service. Our problem here is the cost of the service. And I know on business surveys, companies are concerned about business travelers and how much they have to pay.
That's right.
In order to move around. So how do we impact the cost of the service that we have?
We have spent. This has been a major initiative for Missoula Economic Partnership. And I'm often asked, why are airfares so expensive? And you know why? Because the plane is full. Right. That's why it's expensive.
If you miss a flight coming in here, you might get bumped for a day or 2 days.
But if that plane was half full, fares would be cheaper. However, it all comes down to we need increased capacity and we need more competition. So, as you know, I'm a frequent flyer.
Yes.
And now when I fly, since Delta competes directly into Seattle against Alaska, my airfare itself has gone down about 40%. Right. And I can see it across the board. So, but what we do as an organization is, one, we were helped entice Frontier Airlines. We are currently working on a revenue guarantee program that's a long-term funding source, because an airline is not coming to this community unless we're going to give them money to share the risk.
I think our listeners will be shocked that you got to subsidize airlines.
You have to,
even though the airline industry had the biggest year it's ever had in its history.
Right.
You still got to subsidize airlines to come into smaller communities.
So we are working to with both United Airlines and we're hoping to work with American Airlines to have a new Texas connection out of Missoula.
So Dallas or Houston, probably?
Dallas or Houston.
Yeah.
And the way it would work, and somebody say, well, I don't want to go to Dallas. And it's like, well, you don't actually have to go to Dallas. It's where you endpoint. Let's say you're going to Washington, D.C. If you have American, Delta, and United, they now compete via hub. And so it's the endpoint that matters. And so if United says, well, we'll get you to D.C. for $200, everybody's going to match. And that's how it really works. So it can't just be more seats, even though we need more seats, but we have to have increased competition. And the crazy thing about it is we're always worried about business traveler costs. And it is real. But the thing that really spurs air is leisure traveler. So you have to have more leisure travelers to bring down airfare for business travelers.
Right.
Last thing is they're doing a ton of construction out at the airport. So what are they doing out there? Are you familiar with what they're doing? What is it?
Well, you have a major hangar expansion with FedEx is doing a major expansion. They're going to be doing their own terminal expansion. We've seen Homestead Helicopters expand. Neptune Aviation is expanding. It's a really exciting time out there.
And they're going to be improving on the terminal.
The terminal is next.
Terminal, runways, hangars, the whole schmeal.
When we come back, we're going to have our final moments with James Grunke, who's the CEO of the Missoula Economic Partnership. We'll be back with What Do You Know right after this. We're back.
I want to get back to a question, James, that we were talking about earlier about helping existing businesses grow and prosper. It is hard in many communities to get investment capital, growth capital. Startup money is a different thing. Venture money is a different thing. But to take an existing business that has 8 or 10 employees and has a vision for the future and needs more inventory and needs to grow, what's the banking community support for helping businesses like that grow and expand here?
I hear often that access to capital is a barrier.
Yes.
And I don't believe that to be true. I think preparation for access to capital is a problem, that people are not prepared. They don't know. Most people think the way you go in is I walk into this bank, I say, can I speak to a commercial lender? Here's my program. Can I have some money? They say no. I walk out the door and say there's no capital. And that's just not how it works.
Right.
And so we spend a lot of time in how to prepare companies for money. But more importantly, I think the barrier in our state has been equity capital, right? It's not debt financing like from a bank, but how do I get angel investment or how do I get venture capital funding and things like that? And that's an area that we've spent a lot of time on. We have our own angel investment network that we're looking for high net worth people looking for investment opportunities. And there is so much money looking for a home, it can't find a home.
Right. I think the biggest challenge, let me just say, I think the biggest challenge for that is this. There's a difference between small business and micro business.
Yes.
The SBA defines small business as a business that has, less than 500 employees. Most of our businesses have less than 10 employees. And a business of that size where the person who is the quote-unquote CEO and is also the finance person and is also the salesperson and also unloads the truck at the docks, though that kind of business is not very well prepared to sit down at a bank and give them what they need in order to, bring money into their business.
That's right, and people don't do it. They don't. You need to view your banker as you're interviewing someone to come to work for you, right? And if they need to understand your vision and what you're trying to do. And if you need money, it's probably a year from now. And to me, it's a simple question. If you go into a bank, what does this need to look like for you to fund it? And they'll tell you. These are things I would need to see. And then you have to work backwards. And it's not people's fault. There's this mythology in our country that all entrepreneurs and everybody should just do it themselves. And that's nonsense. It's crazy. Ask for help. How do I do it? People will tell you. Listen, one thing I found about Montana.
No one has succeeded on their own. Anybody tells you that, it's a lot of baloney.
It's a lot of baloney. My favorite thing about Montana is I have never, in all the states I've worked in, all the communities, I have never found a group of people that more universally, if you ask them for help, they're there. At the same time, there is no group of people that is more unwilling to ask for help than a Montanan.
Right.
And so you got the people who's like, I'll do
you hear all
anything
the
to
time.
help you,
I
but
don't
I'm
like
not
all
going to
the.
ask.
You hear all the time. I don't want all that red tape and all that paperwork. I don't want any of that kind of government involvement in my business.
But it's
on the other hand, they need the capital in order to grow.
Or you just meet someone who's someone you respect, go get their opinion. It's that simple.
James, this has been a very interesting conversation. We could go on for hours on this. I have many more questions to ask. We'll probably get you back on the show later on this year, but thank you very much for coming by and spending time with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Pleasure to meet you. We look forward to the next update. That was James Grunke, CEO of Missoula Economic Partnership. Arnie, I will see you next Sunday morning.
See you next week, Scott.
Okay.
James, thank you.
Thank you for listening to What Do You Know?
I can't wait for the next show, Scott.
I'm excited too, Arnie. If you'd like to suggest a guest, send me an email at scottrichman@townsquaremedia.com. We'll see you next week. And thanks for listening to Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290, 1015 FM, and newstalkkgvo.com.